"Aunt Maggie, I am offering you $85,000 for the house, and you should probably take it before it becomes worth even less," Tyler said, sliding a white envelope across my kitchen table as casually as if he were handing me a restaurant menu. I looked at the envelope, then at my nephew. Tyler was 34, neatly dressed in a pale blue button-down shirt with an expensive watch peeking from his cuff, and he had been buying, renovating, and reselling houses around our part of Ohio for almost 6 years. According to my brother David, that made Tyler the family expert on anything involving property. According to Tyler, it made him the family expert on almost everything. $85,000, I repeated. Cash, he said. No realtor commission. No open houses. No strangers walking through your rooms. I handle the paperwork, and you choose the closing date. I poured myself another cup of coffee. That is generous of you. He missed the sarcasm completely. I am trying to make this easy. My farmhouse was more than 70 years old, and nobody would have mistaken it for new construction. The white siding needed paint along the west wall. The roof would probably need replacing within a few years. The heating system was old enough that the technician who serviced it every fall treated it with the respect normally reserved for antique machinery. But the house was paid for. The kitchen was warm. The porch faced 2 mature maple trees that turned bright orange every October. My late husband, Thomas, and I had spent more than 30 years there. I was not emotionally incapable of selling it. I simply saw no reason to sell something because my nephew had suddenly developed concern for my maintenance schedule. "How did you arrive at $85,000? I asked. Tyler leaned back. He had prepared for that question. The house needs work. The septic system is old. The barn adds almost nothing unless someone wants storage. And you have what, 2 acres? Something like that. 2.3, according to the information I found. That caught my attention, although I kept my expression neutral. I had worked as a bookkeeper for a construction company. For 27 years. If there was one habit that job had permanently installed in me, it was this: when someone arrived with a precise number you had not given them, find out where they got it. You researched my property. I pulled the public information. That is normal. Before asking whether I wanted to sell. Tyler smiled. I like being prepared. Apparently. He explained that similar older homes outside town were difficult to price because buyers wanted updated kitchens, newer roofs, modern heating systems, and less maintenance. He said I could probably list higher than his offer, but after repairs, commissions, inspections, and negotiations, I might not end up much better off. And what would you do with it? I asked. Fix it up. Then? Probably resell it. For how much? His smile tightened slightly. Depends on the market. You must have estimated something. Maybe $180,000 if everything goes well. Possibly $200,000. So you make a profit. I take the risk. Of course. He leaned forward. Aunt Maggie, I am not trying to take advantage of you. I had not accused him of that. The fact that he volunteered the sentence made me study him more carefully. Your dad knows about this. I mentioned it. And? He thinks it makes sense. That did not surprise me. David loved me, but my younger brother had spent the last decade suggesting that my life would be easier if I moved into a condominium closer to town. He saw the farmhouse as work. I saw it as home. What is the rush? I asked. There is no rush. Tyler tapped the envelope. The offer is good for 10 days. I looked at him. That sounds a little like a rush. He laughed. It is just business. I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple purchase proposal, not a final contract. Tyler's company name appeared at the top. The purchase price was $85,000. He would cover ordinary closing costs. The property description referred to the street address and county parcel number. I read every line. Tyler checked his phone twice while waiting. "You do not have to study it tonight," he said. "I have nowhere else to be." When I reached the property. Description again, something bothered me. Not the wording. The parcel number. I recognized it from old tax documents Thomas used to keep in a metal file box upstairs. Tyler stood. "Think about it. I really believe this is the cleanest option for you. I will think about it." He smiled, apparently satisfied. Good. After his SUV disappeared down my gravel driveway, I carried my coffee upstairs and opened the hall closet. Thomas's metal file box was exactly where I had left it. Inside were tax bills, insurance papers, an old mortgage release, and the deed from when Thomas's parents transferred the property to us decades earlier. I sat at the small desk near the window and compared the deed with Tyler's proposal. The street address matched. The parcel number appeared related. But the legal description on the old deed was much longer than I remembered. It referred to survey markers, a county road, an acreage that did not sound anything like 2.3 acres. I read it twice. Then a third time. The next morning, David called. "Tyler told me he made you an offer. News travels quickly. He is trying to help, Maggie. Maybe. You are not getting younger. Neither are you, David." He laughed. "Just do not reject it because you are sentimental." I looked through my kitchen window toward the old fence beyond the barn. For as long as I could remember, everyone had treated that fence as the edge of my property. Beyond it was an overgrown field stretching toward a much larger tract near County Road 12. I had never questioned the boundary because I had never needed to. Now I did. "I am not rejecting anything yet," I said. "Then what are you doing?" I looked down at Thomas's deed lying beside Tyler's $85,000 offer. "Before I sell anything," I said, "I am going to find out exactly what I am selling." The next morning, I spread every property document I could find across my kitchen table. Thomas had always been better at keeping papers than throwing them away, which used to irritate me whenever I opened a closet and found another folder from 20 years earlier. That morning, I was grateful for every one of them. I found property tax statements, insurance records, an old title policy, mortgage documents, and 3 copies of surveys that appeared to come from different decades. The newest survey was still more than 30 years old. I made coffee and started with Tyler's number. 2.3 acres. That figure appeared on the county property website beside the house, but the old deed Thomas and I received from his parents described something much larger. The legal description was written in the kind of language that makes ordinary people close a document after the second sentence. It referenced iron pins, an old oak that probably had not existed for decades, the center line of County Road 12, and several bearings and distances I was not qualified to interpret. What I could understand was the acreage written near the end. 8 7/10 acres, more or less. I read it again. 8.7. That was not a rounding error. That was nearly 4 times the acreage Tyler had used when valuing my property. I called the county auditor's office and explained the discrepancy. The woman who answered was helpful but careful. She told me the online acreage could reflect tax mapping rather than a current boundary survey and advised me not to treat the website as a legal determination of ownership. "So which number is correct?" I asked. "I cannot tell you that from here, Mrs. Lawson. You would need someone to review the deed and probably have the property surveyed." That was exactly what I intended to do. I spent the next hour comparing the old documents. One survey sketch showed a narrow strip extending west beyond the fence behind my barn. Another referenced County Road 12 along a boundary I had never associated with my property. That road was more than a quarter mile from my back porch. Between my fence and the road sat an overgrown field that everyone in the family had always assumed belonged to the larger tract next door. Thomas had never farmed it. His father had not farmed it during the years I knew him either. Somewhere along the way, the fence had become the boundary in everyone's mind. But a fence and a legal property line are not necessarily the same thing. I knew that much. From my years working around construction contracts. At 11:30, Tyler called. Have you thought about my offer? I have. Great. His confidence came through the phone so clearly that I could picture him smiling. I am having the property surveyed. The silence lasted just long enough to interest me. Why? He asked. Because I want to confirm the boundaries. Aunt Maggie, you do not need to spend money on that. That is kind of you to worry about my money. I am serious. The county map already shows the parcel. It shows 2.3 acres. Right. My deed says 8.7. Another silence. This one lasted longer. That has to be old information, he said. Possibly. Those descriptions get corrected all the time. Then the survey will confirm the correction. You could spend $1,500 or more proving something we already know. Then I will have purchase certainty. His tone changed slightly. Did somebody tell you to do this? Thomas did, indirectly. Uncle Thomas has been gone 6 years. He kept excellent records. Tyler exhaled. Look, I just do not want you getting confused by old documents. I looked at the deed in front of me. I spent 27 years reconciling construction accounts, Tyler. Old documents do not frighten me. I did not mean it like that. I know. He changed the subject and reminded me that his offer expired in 9 days. I thanked him for the reminder. After we hung up, I called 3 surveying companies. The first could not schedule me for 6 weeks. The second quoted a price but seemed uninterested in reviewing the historical documents. The third connected me with Laura Bennett, a licensed land surveyor who had worked throughout the county for almost 18 years. When I explained the difference between the tax map and the deed, she became immediately interested. Do you have the original legal description? She asked. I have a copy from the deed. Any previous surveys? At least 3. Do any show monument references? Iron pins and something about a stone marker. Keep everything. She could come the following Tuesday. Before ending the call, she asked whether there had been any recent development activity nearby. Why? Older rural parcels sometimes become important when surrounding land starts changing hands. I like to know what records I may need before I arrive. I thought about the property west of mine. For years it had been mostly open ground and scrub trees, but recently survey flags had appeared near County Road 12. Trucks had been coming and going too. I had assumed someone was preparing to sell it. There may be, I said. That afternoon, Rachel stopped by with groceries from town. She was Tyler's older sister and had inherited considerably less of her brother's confidence. When she saw the documents covering my table, she asked what I was doing. I explained Tyler's offer and the acreage discrepancy. Her expression changed when I mentioned County Road 12. What? I asked. Nothing. Rachel. She sat across from me. Tyler has been talking about property around County Road 12 for months. I stopped sorting papers. Why? There is supposed to be a large development going in somewhere out there. Retail, apartments, maybe offices. I do not know the details. Does Tyler? Probably more than I do. He knows one of the agents involved. I looked through the window toward the old fence. Tyler's sudden interest in my aging farmhouse no longer felt quite so sudden. Did he tell you he wanted to buy this place? I asked. No. Rachel looked genuinely surprised. He offered you something. $85,000. She stared at me. For everything? I rested my hand on Thomas's old deed. That, I said, is exactly what I am trying to find out. Laura Bennett arrived Tuesday morning at 8:15 in a white pickup with her surveying company's name printed neatly on the door. She stepped out wearing work boots, khaki pants and a navy jacket, then spent almost 20 minutes at my kitchen table before unloading a single piece of equipment. That immediately made me like her. She wanted documents before assumptions. I gave her Thomas's deed, the old title policy, the 3 survey sketches, and a folder of tax records. Laura arranged everything by date and read quietly. "Where did you get the 2.3 acres, she finally asked. "County website." "And your nephew used the same number?" "Exactly." She tapped the oldest survey. "This drawing appears consistent with the deed description, and neither one describes 2.3 acres. So I own 8.7. I am not saying that yet." She smiled slightly. Surveyors become unpopular when we answer questions before measuring things. I appreciated that answer even more. We walked outside. The September morning was cool enough for a jacket, and dew still covered the grass behind the barn. I showed Laura the fence everyone had treated as my western boundary. It was not much of a fence anymore. Weathered wooden posts stood every 12 feet or so, connected by old wire that disappeared beneath vines in several places. Thomas had repaired sections over the years, but neither of us had ever moved the line. Laura studied it, then looked toward the field beyond. "Do you know when this was built?" "Before I married Thomas, and that was 38 years ago." "Do you know why it was placed here?" "I assumed because this was the property line." "Maybe. Maybe not." She carried a receiver attached to a survey pole while another member of her crew positioned equipment near the driveway. For the next hour, they moved around the property taking measurements. I stayed out of their way until Laura called me toward the northwest corner behind the barn. She was standing nearly 70 feet beyond my fence. "Mrs. Lawson, come look at this." In the grass was a small opening where she had cleared leaves and soil from around a rusted piece of metal. "What is it?" "Possibly an old iron pin." She crouched and checked the position again. "The deed references an iron pin near this bearing. I need to verify it against the other monuments." I looked back at my fence. "That is not even close." "No." She did not sound surprised. "Fences are built for many reasons. Livestock, convenience, terrain. They are evidence, but they do not automatically establish a legal boundary." By noon, they had found another marker farther south. That one was more than 150 feet beyond the fence. Laura would not give me conclusions. But I could tell something had changed in her concentration. She asked whether she could cross the overgrown field toward County Road 12. "I thought that belonged to the neighboring parcel." "That is what we are trying to determine." Around 1 o'clock, a black SUV turned into my driveway. Tyler climbed out carrying 2 coffees and the expression of a man who had discovered something inconvenient. "You actually hired a surveyor." "I told you I would." He handed me one of the coffees. "I figured I would stop by." On a Tuesday afternoon. I was nearby. Tyler was rarely nearby unless there was a commission involved, but I thanked him for the coffee. He watched Laura's crew working beyond the fence. "Why are they over there?" "They found an iron pin." His eye shifted toward me. "Where?" I pointed. Tyler stared at the location for several seconds. "That does not mean anything by itself." Laura said essentially the same thing. "Old markers get moved." Apparently that happens too. My refusal to argue seemed to bother him more than disagreement would have. "You know my offer expires Friday." "I remember. If this survey delays things, I can extend it a couple days." "That is generous." He frowned. "Why do you keep saying it like that?" Before I could answer, Laura approached us carrying a tablet. I introduced Tyler as my nephew. He immediately mentioned that he worked in real estate. Laura simply nodded. "Mrs. Lawson, I need another day in the field and then some courthouse research." "Did you find something?" I asked. "Enough that I do not want to rely on the county's online map." Tyler folded his arms. "The auditor shows 2.3 acres. Tax maps are useful," Laura said, "but they are not boundary surveys. The neighboring tract has been treated as separate property for decades." "Possibly. I am reviewing recorded instruments, not local assumptions. Tyler glanced at me. This is exactly how simple sales become complicated. Laura looked at him calmly. Accurate boundaries usually make sales less complicated. I nearly smiled. After Tyler left, Laura and her crew continued toward the western field. I watched from the porch until they disappeared behind a line of brush. Around 3:30, Laura returned alone. There was mud on her boots and a folded copy of the old survey in her hand. I found another monument, she said. Near the road. Very near it. How far beyond my fence? She looked toward the field before answering. More than 500 feet from the fence line at the southern end. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. 500 feet. Approximately. I need to verify the complete boundary before I give you acreage. She opened the old survey and pointed to a line running toward County Road 12. But this description is matching the physical evidence much better than the current tax map. That evening, Rachel called. I told her only that the survey was still underway. I did not mention the markers. I did not call David. And I certainly did not call Tyler. The following morning, Laura went to the county recorder's office while I worked in my garden and tried not to invent conclusions before the facts arrived. Shortly after 4, my phone rang. Mrs. Lawson, this is Laura. Her voice was measured, but different from the day before. I found the recorded plat that predates the current tax mapping. I set down the basket I was carrying. And? I still need to finish calculations, but I can tell you one thing with confidence. I waited. That fence behind your barn was never recorded as your western property boundary. Laura returned Thursday morning carrying a cardboard document tube, a tablet, and the careful expression of someone who knew the next conversation mattered. I had already made coffee, although she declined a cup and asked if we could start outside. We walked behind the barn toward the fence while 2 members of her crew positioned equipment near the southern field. Small orange survey flags now appeared in places I had never considered part of my yard. The first stood about 70 feet beyond the old fence. The next was farther west. By the time we reached the southern end, the markers stretched so far toward County Road 12 that I could barely connect them mentally with the farmhouse behind us. You finished the calculations? I asked. I did. Laura opened the tube and removed a large survey drawing. She rested it across the hood of her truck and placed 2 metal clips on the corners to keep the breeze from lifting it. The recorded deed, the older plats, and the monuments we recovered are consistent. She pointed to the heavy boundary line. Your legal parcel contains approximately 8.7 acres. Even though I had seen that number on Thomas's deed, hearing a licensed surveyor confirm it felt entirely different. And the fence. It sits well inside your legal boundary for much of the western side. Why would anyone build it there? There could be several reasons. Maybe the previous owners only needed to enclose the area around the house and barn. Maybe maintaining a fence farther out was inconvenient. There is also a drainage swale through this section. She traced a shallow curve on the map. People often assume an old fence represents ownership when it was actually built for practical use. I studied the drawing. My farmhouse, barn, driveway, and the land I had always considered mine occupied only the eastern portion. The remaining acreage extended west and south in an irregular shape. So the field beyond the fence belongs to me. According to the recorded instruments and the monuments we recovered, yes. I almost laughed, not because anything was funny, but because Thomas and I had lived beside those acres for decades without thinking of them as ours. Does the neighboring owner know? I asked. That is a legal question more than a surveying question. My job is to identify the boundary. I would recommend having a real estate attorney review everything before you make decisions. I was planning to. Laura pointed toward the southern edge. There is another detail you should understand. Before she could explain, a familiar black SUV came down my driveway. Tyler parked beside Laura's truck and walked toward us. He had not called first. I saw the survey flags from the road, he said. His eyes moved immediately to the map. So what did you find? Laura looked at me before answering. I appreciated that. You can tell him, I said. Mrs. Lawson's deed describes approximately 8.7 acres, and the recovered monument support that description. Tyler stared at her. 8.7. Approximately. That cannot be right. Laura remained calm. The survey is based on recorded documents and field evidence. Tyler stepped closer to the map. The county records show 2.3. The online tax map does. Which is what everybody uses. For general reference, Laura said. Not as a substitute for a boundary survey. Tyler looked at me as though I had personally rearranged the county overnight. So you think all of this is yours? I do not think anything, I said. I paid someone qualified to determine it. He ignored that and studied the map. This changes the offer. There it was. Not congratulations. Not surprised that his aunt had apparently owned 6 additional acres for decades. The offer. Does it? I asked. Obviously. I priced the property based on 2.3 acres. You told me most of the value was in the house. The land still matters. Apparently. Tyler rubbed his jaw. I would need to run numbers. Take your time. He looked surprised. My original offer expires tomorrow. Then let it expire. His expression hardened slightly. Aunt Maggie, I am trying to be fair. Then fairness should survive accurate information. Laura quietly rolled one corner of the survey back toward herself, clearly wanting no part in the family conversation. Tyler asked whether he could photograph the drawing. Not yet, I said. Why not? Because I paid for it, and I have not even discussed it with an attorney. I am family. You are also the buyer. That stopped him. For the first time since he had placed the $85,000 offer on my kitchen table, Tyler seemed to understand that I was treating him exactly as I would treat any other person trying to purchase my property. He left 20 minutes later without mentioning a revised price. Laura waited until his SUV disappeared before reopening the survey. You were about to show me something, I said. Yes. Her finger moved toward the narrow southern portion of my parcel. The boundary continued past the overgrown field and reached a strip along County Road 12. Your property has direct frontage here. How much? A little over 300 feet, depending on how the right-of-way is treated. I looked toward the road in the distance. I never knew that. There is more. She enlarged an aerial image on her tablet. My parcel appeared beside a much larger tract shaded with development markings. I checked recent planning records because you mentioned activity nearby. The neighboring tract is roughly 90 acres. A development application was filed earlier this year. Rachel had been right. What kind of development? Mixed use. Residential units, retail space, and some professional offices are shown in the preliminary materials. I studied the map. The 90-acre tract sat behind mine, stretching north and west. Does that affect me? I cannot advise you on value, Laura said, but I can point out geography. She placed her finger on County Road 12, then moved it across the narrow southern section of my land toward the development parcel. This is one of the few direct connections between that project and the county road. I looked at her, then back at the map. Suddenly Tyler's interest in an old farmhouse with an aging roof made considerably more sense. My phone rang before I could ask another question. The screen showed David's name. When I answered, my brother did not bother with hello. Maggie, he said, Tyler just called me. What exactly did that survey find? David arrived before I had decided how much I wanted to tell him over the phone. 10 minutes after his call, his silver pickup rolled into my driveway, and by then Laura had packed most of her equipment. Tyler returned 20 minutes later, which told me my nephew had been making more phone calls than I had. Rachel came after work because David had apparently called her too. By 5:30, the four of us were sitting around my kitchen table with Laura's preliminary survey spread between the salt shaker and a bowl of apples. It felt strangely familiar. For years, this table had hosted Thanksgiving dinners, birthday cakes, tax paperwork, and arguments about whether Thomas made coffee too strong. Now everyone was staring at lines on a piece of paper as if they had been hiding beneath our plates all along. "So this is confirmed?" David asked. "The boundary evidence is strong," I said. "Laura still has to finalize the survey." Tyler leaned forward. "The acreage is one issue. The important question is whether any of that land is actually usable." I looked at him. Interesting choice of words. I mean financially useful. Some of it is overgrown. There is drainage. It is not like Aunt Maggie suddenly discovered 6 acres of prime residential lots. Rachel folded her arms. Nobody said she did. Tyler ignored her. "I am just trying to keep expectations realistic." That sentence sounded almost identical to the language he had used when explaining why my farmhouse was supposedly worth so little. I reached for the aerial map Laura had printed for me and placed it on top of the survey. "What do you know about the development near County Road 12? Tyler's eyes moved toward his father before returning to me. "What development?" Rachel gave him a look. "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Pretend you have never heard about it. You have been talking about that project for months." David frowned. "What project?" Tyler sat back. "It is preliminary. A development group has been assembling property around the western side of town." "What kind of development?" I asked. "Mixed use, supposedly. Apartments. Some. Retail? Probably. Offices? Maybe." I let the silence sit for a moment. "And you knew about this before offering me $85,000. Tyler's jaw tightened. "Knowing there is development in the area does not mean your property is valuable to them." I did not say it did. "Then what are you suggesting?" "I am asking why you suddenly wanted my house." "Because I thought it was an opportunity for both of us." "Both of us?" "Yes. You get cash without dealing with a listing, and I take on the renovation." Rachel looked at him. "And then you wait for development to push prices up." Tyler turned toward her. "That is called investing. It is also information you might have mentioned to Aunt Maggie." David raised a hand. Everybody calmed down. Tyler made an offer. Maggie did not accept it. Nobody has done anything wrong. Technically, he was right. Tyler had not forged my signature. He had not lied about a written appraisal. He had made a low offer based on information he possessed and information he assumed I did not. That distinction mattered to me. "I agree," I said. Tyler seemed relieved. "Thank you. But I am no longer interested in your offer." The relief disappeared. "You have not even heard a revised number." "I do not need one." "That makes no sense." "It makes perfect sense. I do not know what this property is worth yet, so I am not selling it." Tyler looked at David as though his father might negotiate with me on his behalf. David wisely stayed quiet. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Susan Parker whose firm had handled land transactions for the construction company where I used to work. Susan remembered me, which made me feel both pleased and older than I wanted to admit. I sent her the deed, Laura's preliminary survey, and Tyler's offer. 2 days later, we met in her office. She spent almost an hour reviewing the documents before turning to the aerial map. "Your first priority is confirming title and boundaries," she said. "After that, we need to understand what is happening next door." Laura found a development application. Susan nodded. "I checked that before you arrived." She rotated her monitor toward me. The proposed project covered roughly 90 acres. The preliminary concept included apartments, retail buildings, professional offices, internal streets, and stormwater infrastructure. 2 proposed access points were marked on the plan. One connected to a road north of the property. The second pointed toward County Road 12 but stopped before reaching it. Directly between that unfinished access line and the county road was the narrow southern section Laura had identified as mine. "Is that important?" I asked. Susan chose her words carefully. "Potentially very important. Development land is not valued only by acreage. Access can influence what a developer is able to build, how traffic moves, where utilities run, and whether planning officials approve a project as designed. So they need my land." I did not say that. "They may have alternatives. They may redesign. They may negotiate with another owner. But I would strongly recommend that you do not sell, grant an easement, or sign anything involving this parcel until we know more." I thought about Tyler sitting at my kitchen table telling me his $85,000 offer was good for 10 days. "Can we find out whether anyone has already discussed this corridor?" Susan looked at the planning documents again. "Yes." 3 days later, she called me at home. "Maggie, I spoke with the land use consultant working on the development." I set down my coffee. "And?" I asked a very simple question. I asked whether their proposed County Road 12 connection crosses the Lawson parcel. "What did they say?" Susan paused. "They asked whether you would be willing to meet." The meeting with the development group was scheduled for the following Wednesday, but before I agreed to sit across a table from anyone, Susan wanted to know exactly how much Tyler had known when he offered to buy my property. I told her I was less interested in punishing my nephew than understanding whether I had been dealing with family advice or a business strategy disguised as family advice. Susan suggested I ask questions before making accusations. That suited me. Sunday afternoon, I invited David, Rachel, and Tyler for coffee. Tyler arrived last. He walked into my kitchen carrying a bakery box and behaving as though the previous week had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. "Peace offering," he said, setting the box on the counter. "I did not know we were at war." Rachel almost smiled. David did not. I poured coffee and waited until everyone was seated. Then I placed Tyler's original offer on the table. "I want to understand something before Wednesday." Tyler glanced at the paper. "What happens Wednesday?" "I am meeting with representatives from the development company." His expression changed so quickly that even David noticed. "They contacted you?" "My attorney contacted their consultant." "Why would she do that?" "Because their preliminary access plan appears to cross my property." Tyler looked down at his coffee. David turned toward him. "You knew about that?" "I knew they were considering access from County Road 12. Rachel leaned forward. "How long have you known?" Tyler hesitated. "A few months." The kitchen became very quiet. I had expected the answer, but expecting something does not make hearing it pleasant. "Before you offered me $85,000? I asked. "Yes." David stared at his son. "You told me Maggie's place was just an old house on a couple acres. That is what the county map showed." "That is not what she asked." Tyler rubbed his forehead. "I knew development was coming. I did not know Aunt Maggie owned the strip they might need." "But you thought property values around here would increase," Rachel said. "Of course I did. That was part of the investment." I looked at him. "Then why did you spend 20 minutes explaining how my house might become worth less?" "Because the house needs repairs." That was true. "You also knew the land around it might become worth more." Tyler did not answer immediately. "I was taking a risk." "At $85,000. "Yes." "Using information you never mentioned to me." "I did not have an obligation to explain every market factor." David pushed his coffee away. "She is your aunt, Tyler. And she is perfectly capable of saying no." Which she did. There was something technically accurate and emotionally empty about that answer. I had spent enough years around business people to recognize the difference. "You are right," I said. Everyone looked at me. I was capable of saying no. "You made an offer." "I did not sign it." "That part is simple." Tyler seemed relieved again, but only briefly. "What is not simple," I continued, "is that you presented yourself as my nephew trying to save me from a burdensome property while privately believing the neighborhood was about to become more valuable. I never lied to you. You told me I should sell before the house became worth even less." "The house, yes. You were not buying only the house." Rachel looked down at the table. David's face had gone red with embarrassment rather than anger. Tyler stared at the offer between us. "I thought I saw an opportunity," he finally said. "I understand that. And I thought if I bought it, at least the money stayed in the family. The property would have stayed in your company." He looked at me, and for the first time his confidence seemed less like arrogance and more like a shield he did not know how to put down. "What do you want me to say? The truth is enough." He took a breath. I knew the development group had been negotiating around County Road 12. I heard they wanted better southern access. I checked nearby parcels. The county system showed yours as 2.3 acres, so I assumed the boundary stopped at the fence. I figured if I bought your place now, renovated it, and held it for a few years, I could make a good return. Did you know one of the agents involved?" I asked. His eyes shifted toward Rachel. "Yes." "Did that person tell you to buy my property?" "No. Absolutely not." "Did they tell you the development needed access?" "They said access was one of the project's challenges." That was all. I believed him, mostly because the truth already explained enough. Tyler had not known the secret hidden in my deed. He had simply known enough to think he was smarter than I was. David stood and walked toward the window. "I encouraged Maggie to take your offer," he said quietly. "Because I trusted what you told me." Tyler looked at his father. "Dad, I was not trying to hurt anybody." "Maybe not," David said. "But you were certainly trying to profit from what we did not know." Nobody spoke for several seconds. I gathered the papers and returned them to the folder. "Wednesday's meeting has nothing to do with your offer anymore," I said. "That offer is finished." Tyler nodded slowly. "I understand." After everyone left, Rachel stayed behind to help with the coffee cups. At the door, she asked whether I was nervous about meeting the developers. "A little." "What if they offer you a lot of money?" "Then I will listen." "And if they pressure you?" I smiled. "Your brother already gave me excellent practice." Wednesday morning, Susan and I arrived at a conference room downtown 10 minutes early. Across the table were 3 representatives from the development company, including a land acquisition director named Mark Lawson. After introductions, Mark opened a large site plan and got directly to the point. "Mrs. Lawson, our original property information did not show your parcel extending this far west. Neither did mine until last week." He nodded. "The updated survey changes our understanding considerably." Susan asked what they wanted. Mark placed his finger on approximately 2 acres along the southern portion of my land. "We would like to discuss acquiring this section, together with certain access and utility rights." I looked at the map, then at him. "Before we discuss selling anything, I would like to know why this particular section matters so much." Mark paused, glanced at the engineer beside him, and then answered with a sentence Tyler would have paid dearly to hear before making his offer. "Because without a practical connection to County Road 12, Mrs. Lawson, our current development plan becomes significantly more difficult." Mark Ellison did not say the project was impossible without my property. He was too experienced for that. Instead, he explained that their engineers had studied several access configurations and that the connection across my southern acreage was the most practical. The northern entrance could handle part of the traffic, but relying on a single primary access point created complications with circulation, emergency planning, utility placement, and the overall site design. I listened while Susan took notes. For 27 years, I had watched contractors make expensive mistakes because someone became excited about a number before understanding the conditions attached to it. I had no intention of repeating that mistake simply because the number might belong to me. "What exactly are you proposing?" Susan asked. Mark slid a preliminary drawing across the table. The company wanted approximately 2.1 acres along the southern edge of my parcel. The proposed section would connect County Road 12 to the development and provide space for roadway improvements, utilities, and drainage infrastructure. They also wanted permanent easement rights along a defined corridor. "And the rest of Mrs. Lawson's property?" Susan asked. "She keeps it." I looked at the drawing. My farmhouse, barn, maple trees, driveway, and most of the newly confirmed acreage were untouched. "What happens to my access?" I asked. "Your existing driveway remains. Construction traffic. We can establish restrictions. Drainage." The engineer beside Mark answered that one. He explained how stormwater would be managed and said any final agreement could include protections for my remaining land. I asked about noise, landscaping, road setbacks, and whether utilities would cross anywhere outside the proposed corridor. Nobody laughed at my questions. Nobody told me I was confused by old documents. Nobody suggested I should simply trust them because they understood real estate better than I did. When the meeting ended, Mark said they would prepare a formal proposal after reviewing Laura's final survey. "Do you have a price range in mind?" I asked. Susan glanced at me but did not interrupt. Mark smiled politely. "We would prefer to complete our valuation before discussing numbers." So would I. That afternoon, Susan arranged for an independent appraiser who specialized in development land rather than residential houses. That distinction turned out to matter enormously. A week earlier, Tyler had looked at my property and seen an aging farmhouse, an old septic system, and what he believed were 2.3 acres. The appraiser looked at exactly the same location and considered road frontage, zoning potential, assemblage value, access, utility placement, surrounding development, and the leverage created by geography. Laura completed the final survey 2 days later. 8.7 acres. The number was no longer an old line in Thomas's deed. It was professionally measured, monumented, mapped, and documented. I placed a copy in the same metal file box Thomas had kept upstairs. "You would have enjoyed this," I said quietly, looking at his old handwriting on one of the folders. Friday evening, David came by alone. He stood on the porch for a while before saying what he had apparently rehearsed on the drive over. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "Telling you to take Tyler's offer without knowing what I was talking about. You thought he was helping. I should have asked more questions." I handed him a glass of iced tea and sat beside him. "So should Tyler." David looked across the field beyond the old fence. Orange survey flags were still visible in the grass. "I cannot believe all that was yours the whole time." "Neither can I." Thomas never knew. Maybe he did when he was younger. Maybe his father explained it once and it stopped mattering because nobody used the back acreage. "I cannot ask either of them now." David nodded. "Tyler feels terrible. Does he feel terrible because of what he did or because his plan failed?" David gave me a tired smile. "Probably some of both. That is at least honest." The following Monday, the appraiser called Susan. She did not give me a final valuation because several assumptions still needed verification, but she said enough to change the scale of the conversation. The strategic corridor alone could be worth several $100,000 depending on the developer's alternatives and the rights they required. That evening, Tyler called. "Can I come over?" he asked. "You know where I live." He arrived without paperwork for the first time since this began. We sat at the kitchen table. "Dad said you met the developers." "I did." "Did they make an offer?" "Not yet." He nodded. "I have been thinking about what you said." I waited. "You were right. I treated you differently because you were family." That was not the admission I expected. Usually people say family deserves better treatment. I know. He looked embarrassed. I thought because I knew you, I could skip the part where I explained why I was interested. I convinced myself that if the deal worked, everyone benefited. Mostly you. Mostly me, he admitted. That mattered more than an elaborate apology would have. I am not asking you to forgive the offer, he said. I just wanted you to know I understand why you do not trust me with this anymore. You are still my nephew, Tyler. He looked up. But being my nephew does not make you my financial advisor. A small smile appeared. Fair. 3 days later, Susan called while I was trimming dead branches near the barn. The developer sent the preliminary offer. I put down my pruning shears. How preliminary? Preliminary enough that we are not accepting anything today. Good. Do you want the number? I suppose that would help. Susan paused. They are proposing $975,000 for the 2.1 acres and the associated access and utility rights. I looked beyond the fence toward County Road 12. $975,000 for land my nephew had not even realized I owned. Is that a fair offer? I asked. It is a serious offer, Susan said. Those are not the same thing. $975,000 was the kind of number that could make a person forget to ask what came with it. I had no intention of becoming that person. Susan and I spent the next 2 weeks examining every condition in the developer's proposal. The 2.1 acres were only part of the transaction. They wanted permanent roadway access, utility rights beneath portions of the corridor, construction access during development, and specific drainage accommodations. Each item had value, and each could affect the property I planned to keep. Susan brought in the independent appraiser and a land use consultant named Robert Hale. Robert had spent more than 20 years reviewing commercial development projects around central Ohio, and he approached my land the same way Laura had approached the survey, by refusing to assume anything. We met at my farmhouse on a cool Monday morning. Robert walked the entire southern section, photographed County Road 12, studied the slope, reviewed the development plans, and asked questions about drainage after heavy rain. When we returned to the kitchen, he spread several maps across the table. The developer has alternatives, he said. That matters because you should never negotiate as though someone has no choice when they actually do. How good are their alternatives? I asked. More expensive, less efficient, and potentially more difficult from a planning standpoint. Susan smiled slightly. Which also matters. Robert explained that the value of my corridor was not simply 2.1 acres multiplied by the price of ordinary land. Its importance came from what it allowed the neighboring 90-acre project to do. A direct connection to County Road 12 could improve traffic circulation, create a more logical utility route, and preserve more flexibility within the development itself. So $975,000 is low? I asked. It is not insulting, Robert said. But I would not recommend accepting it without negotiating both price and terms. That afternoon, Susan prepared our response. We did not demand an absurd number. We did not threaten anyone. We simply identified the value of the land, the permanent rights being requested, the effect on my remaining acreage, and the protections I required. I wanted construction access limited to the purchased corridor. I wanted clear responsibility for drainage improvements. I wanted landscaping buffers where the new road approached my retained property. I wanted no additional easements outside the defined area without separate written approval. Most importantly, I was not selling my farmhouse, barn, driveway, or the remaining acreage. Tyler called 2 days later. Dad told me you turned down almost $1 million. I did not turn it down. I countered. For how much? That is between me, my attorney, and the buyer. He laughed softly. I deserved that. A little. Are you keeping the house? Absolutely. Even if they want all of it. They have not asked for all of it. Would you sell if they did? I looked around my kitchen. Thomas had installed the oak cabinets himself 22 years earlier, complaining the entire weekend that no wall in the house was perfectly square. "Everything has a price," I said. "But not everything needs to be for sale." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I am learning that." A week later, the developer responded. Their second proposal increased the compensation to $1.2 million and accepted most of our restrictions. Susan recommended another round. The appraiser agreed. By then, I had stopped thinking of the process as some extraordinary windfall and started treating it exactly like the business transaction it was. That surprised David. "You are negotiating over $1 million like you used to argue with the electric company about a $40 billing mistake," he said one evening. "The principle is similar." "It really is not. Numbers are numbers." He shook his head and laughed. The final meeting took place 3 weeks after the first offer. Mark Ellison sat across from Susan and me with revised documents in front of him. The company agreed to purchase approximately 2.1 acres and acquire specifically defined access and utility rights for a total consideration of $1,350,000, subject to final title work, planning approvals, and closing conditions. They also accepted the drainage protections, construction limitations, and landscape buffer Susan had requested. I would retain approximately 6.6 acres, including the farmhouse, barn, driveway, and the land surrounding them. Mark pushed the agreement toward Susan rather than toward me. I noticed that. He understood by then that nothing reached my signature without passing through her first. Susan reviewed the final changes and looked at me. "You do not have to decide today." "I know." I took the documents home. That evening, I sat on the porch while the sun dropped behind the maple trees. The old fence was still visible beyond the barn, looking exactly as it had before any of this started. For decades, that fence had quietly convinced everyone that my property ended there. Tyler believed it. David believed it. I believed it. The difference was that when the question finally mattered, I checked. The next morning, I called Susan. "I am ready." Closing would still take several weeks, but the major terms were settled. News traveled through the family faster than any county filing ever could. Rachel came over with a bottle of sparkling cider. David brought dinner from my favorite Italian restaurant. Tyler arrived later, standing awkwardly at the door until I invited him inside. $1.35 million, he asked after we sat down. "That is the agreement." He stared at the kitchen table where, only weeks earlier, he had placed his $85,000 offer. For 2.1 acres. And certain rights. "And you keep the house. And most of the land." Tyler leaned back and let out a slow breath. "I thought I was the smartest person in this deal." "That was probably your first mistake." He smiled despite himself. "What was the second?" "Thinking the survey was about acreage." He looked puzzled. I folded my hands on the table. "The survey told us where the property line was, Tyler. Everything else revealed where the family boundaries needed to be." The closing took place on a bright Thursday morning in late October, almost 2 months after Tyler had first placed his $85,000 offer on my kitchen table. Susan sat beside me while the title representative moved through the documents one page at a time. The developer had completed its inspections, the final legal descriptions matched Laura's survey, and every restriction Susan negotiated appeared exactly where it belonged. I read each page anyway. Nobody rushed me. When the final signature was complete, I sat back and looked at Susan. "That is it. That is it." After fees, taxes, and the expenses connected to the transaction were accounted for, the remaining proceeds would give me more financial security than Thomas and I had ever imagined. Yet driving home, I felt strangely unchanged. The farmhouse was still waiting at the end of the same gravel driveway. The barn still needed paint. The porch step still creaked near the left railing. Money had changed my options, but it had not changed the place I wanted to wake up the next morning. I paid off the small remaining balance on the home improvement loan, replaced the roof, repaired the barn, and hired someone to improve drainage near the garden. Susan introduced me to a financial advisor who worked under a fiduciary standard, and I invested most of the proceeds conservatively. I also created an emergency fund large enough that I would never again feel pressured to sell something simply because a furnace failed or a property tax bill arrived at the wrong time. I did not buy a luxury car. I did not move into a larger house. I replaced my 12-year-old refrigerator because the freezer had been making a sound like a lawnmower for 6 months, and that felt extravagant enough. The development project moved slowly through the approval process. Survey crews appeared along County Road 12, followed by engineers and utility markers. Under the agreement, construction remained well away from my house and barn. The company installed the landscaping buffer before major work began, just as Susan had required. One afternoon, I stood near the old fence watching workers place new boundary markers along the land I had retained. Tyler pulled into the driveway and walked out to meet me. He had changed in small ways over the previous weeks. He called before visiting. He stopped giving advice unless I asked. Most importantly, he had stopped trying to explain his original offer. "I brought something," he said. He handed me a folder. I opened it and found a comparative market analysis for a widow named Mrs. Green who lived several miles away. "What is this?" She asked me about selling her house. "Why are you showing me?" "Because she is 74, her husband died last year, and her property records are confusing." I looked at him carefully. "And?" I told her not to sign a listing agreement yet. I suggested she get a survey and an independent appraisal first. I could not help smiling. "That probably cost you a commission." "Maybe." "How does that feel?" "Annoying." I laughed. Tyler did too. Then his expression became serious. "But right." That was the first moment I believed he had learned something deeper than the value of my land. David eventually stopped apologizing every time the subject came up. Rachel never stopped teasing him about it. At Thanksgiving, we gathered around the same kitchen table where the entire mess had started. Tyler brought dessert. David carved the turkey. Rachel insisted on telling everyone how I had negotiated with a development company while still clipping grocery coupons. "Those coupons save money," I reminded her. "You have over $1 million invested now," she said. "And I intend to keep it." Tyler raised his glass of iced tea. Nobody argued with Aunt Maggie about numbers. Everyone laughed, including me. After dinner, Tyler helped carry dishes to the sink. He paused near the window overlooking the field. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had accepted my offer?" "Sometimes." "You would have lost all of this." "No," I said. "I would have sold it." He turned toward me. "Is there a difference?" "A big one. Losing something suggests I had no choice. I had a choice. I just did not have all the information yet." He nodded slowly. "I am glad you checked." "So am I." By spring, the new access road was under construction along the southern edge of the former parcel. From my porch, I could see only a small portion of it through the trees. Most mornings, the view from my kitchen window remained almost exactly as it had been when Thomas was alive. The maple trees turned green. Birds returned to the fence posts. My garden stretched behind the house in neat rows. Laura's permanent markers now showed where my land actually ended, but I kept the old fence. It no longer represented a boundary. It represented an assumption, and I found that useful to remember. People make assumptions about property because of fences. They make assumptions about money because of appearances. And families sometimes make assumptions about older relatives because familiarity convinces them there is nothing left to discover. Tyler had looked at me and seen an aunt with an aging farmhouse who might be grateful for an easy check. I had looked at myself and nearly accepted the same description. The truth was sitting upstairs in a metal file box the entire time, written into a deed nobody had bothered to read carefully. In the end, the most valuable thing I discovered was not the extra acreage or even the money. It was the difference between trusting family and surrendering judgment. I could love Tyler without doing business on his terms. I could forgive him without pretending his choices had been acceptable. I could listen to David without letting his confidence replace my own questions. And I could keep the home Thomas and I had built our life around without being trapped by it. Sometimes the smallest decision changes everything. Mine was simply refusing to sign until I knew exactly what belonged to me.